this whole concept of forgiving and forgetting, or forgiving and not forgetting. And does that mean that you've actually practiced forgiveness if you choose to forgive someone and not forget what they've done, and or have the person in your life still, or create healthy boundaries. So it's really, as you'll see in this book, with different people's experiences and journeys, it's really up to every single person how they choose to manage their forgiveness journey. But it's unique to every single person.
You're the daughter of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you are also the daughter of Maria Shriver.
Yes, I am.
And you're the wife of Chris Pratt.
Yes, I am.
Are you sure?
I am.
You're sure?
I am
All
sure.
right. Well, you've got the kind of Kennedy teeth, so I'm believing.
I know.
I'm believing some of this. It's great to meet you. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having
I'm a
me.
fan of your whole family, and let me say that I'm a particular fan of your book and the subject of your book, which I read yesterday, The Gift of Forgiveness, inspiring stories from those who have overcome the unforgivable. Katherine Schwarzenegger Pratt, what led you to write a book like this? Because this is a big topic for almost everybody.
Yeah, well, it is a topic for everyone, and it's a topic that every single person will come face to face with at some point in their lives. And so I found myself struggling with forgiveness in my 20s, especially, and just not really clear on what forgiveness meant to me at that time in my life. And so I kind of wanted to take a deeper dive into it. And I found the most helpful advice from just talking to other people about their forgiveness journeys and kind of learning from their struggles and their journeys and applying it to my own life. So I wanted to put that in a book for everybody else.
In all seriousness, the longer you live, the more you realize you can't escape this question of whether I forgive or don't. And I have often said, very often, that people don't seem to understand what forgiveness really is. What does it mean to forgive? What doesn't it mean? When Jesus says, love your enemies, he clearly doesn't mean have warm, soapy feelings, lovey-dovey feelings to your enemies. If somebody has wronged you grievously, he can't mean that. What does he mean? So how did you approach this, to the very idea of like defining what it means to forgive and what's healthy forgiveness and what's not healthy?
Well, I think the great part and also really complicated part of that question is that forgiveness means something different to every single one of us. So it's such a unique topic. And I think similar to what you were saying about Jesus, it's this whole concept of forgiving and forgetting, or forgiving and not forgetting. And does that mean that you've actually practiced forgiveness if you choose to forgive someone and not forget what they've done, and or have the person in your life still, or create healthy boundaries. So it's really, as you'll see in this book, with different people's experiences and journeys, it's really up to every single person how they choose to manage their forgiveness journey. But it's unique to every single person.
You hear this over and over to the point that it's a fatiguing cliche, except it's true that when we forgive, we're freeing ourselves.
Yes.
What do you say to somebody who says, look, I was wronged incredibly grievously, and I cannot stop hating that person, and it feels right, it feels just to hate them for what they did because it's so evil what they did. What are you telling me that I ought to do with those feelings?
Well, I would say that that's okay. First of all, because I know that there are a lot of people who feel that way. So if somebody said that to me, I would say that's totally understandable. I get it. That's totally okay. Number one. Number two, I also like to remind people that just because I wrote this book on forgiveness, and I'm very honored to have been able to write it and listen to people's stories, that I'm not an expert on forgiveness by any means. I'm just here to be able to say that I've been lucky enough to practice forgiveness in my life. I'm a student of forgiveness, so I know I will struggle with it in my future. And these people in this book have also practiced it and talk about this, as you just said, this cliche saying, which is that when you're able to practice forgiveness, you feel this amazing sense of freedom and weight lifted off your shoulders. So there are a lot of people who feel like practicing forgiveness feels like a betrayal of their own hurt, which I think is, kind of what you're saying, that if you choose to forgive someone, that it almost makes what they did to you okay. And that feels wrong because this anger towards someone or this frustration might drive you in your life. And also not having that as a presence might feel like what they did wasn't actually that bad. So it's a complicated topic, and that theme comes up a lot in the book.
It is interesting because I think when you're talking about justice, people want justice, and that makes sense. But sometimes, I mean, it's like if you're in law school and they give you these different cases and they say, well, okay, what about if the person that did that to you dies?
Right.
Well, you can't put them in jail. You can't hurt them. They're gone. So you have to deal with that, and you have to think about it practically speaking. What are you looking for? What's the outcome you're looking for?
Right, and also what are you looking for from them that you are able to eventually shift to you being able to look at yourself and give that gift to yourself, because it's actually not about another person at all, which for me was such an eye-opening thing to realize, that I think so many of us grow up with this idea that we need to wait for the person who wronged us to ask us for forgiveness and come around to saying like, oh, actually what I did to them was probably not the greatest thing. So, please will you forgive me? And what I realized, and the people in this book really taught this to me, was that making a decision to forgive someone is totally up to you and has nothing to do with waiting for anybody. You can take that power and control back yourself and make the decision to do it.
The example I always think of, because it's helpful to think about these examples, when before you were born, Pope John Paul II was shot by someone, and but you've heard of Pope John Paul II.
Yes,
awesome. Even though you weren't born, that's impressive.
Thank you.
So when he was shot, it's just so interesting that the man who shot him, goes to prison. Mm-hmm. And then Pope John Paul II goes to the prison to forgive him and to pray with him. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean the guy gets out of prison. Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, part of this, right, is that you understand that it is complicated. There are times when, by committing a murder, someone has effectively committed a crime against the whole society. So you have the power to forgive them for what they did to you.
Yes.
But you don't have the power to say, okay, now you're free to go. Because there is a societal justice that says, no, you're gonna stay in prison.
Of course. And also to see, as you're saying, this ripple effect that forgiveness has on those around the situation. It's really interesting because in the book, you see that with a lot of situations, how one person's act of forgiveness has this ripple effect on multiple people, sometimes thousands of people, situations that, would not have been possible had the person not chosen to forgive.
It's hard for me to think of forgiveness outside of the worldview of my Christian faith, because I think to myself, I have been forgiven by God, and because He's forgiven me, I have an obligation to forgive others. He's forgiven me so much. And I think that when you have that kind of humility, you can approach those who've harmed you in a different way. You can pray for them. But I don't know where someone goes if they don't have that sense of God. I know in the book you talk to all different kinds of people. At that point, does it just become a practical thing?
Well, it was important to me to have people who had faith as being a big part of their lives, others who had come to faith through their forgiveness journey, and some people who didn't really have it as being a part of their lives. Right. I, have grown up with faith being a big part of my life. So for me, it's something that I can lean on and also believe in a higher power and higher being when going through challenging times. So I find it to be incredibly helpful, of course. But I think people having faith and also having a belief to pull them through challenging situations is really helpful. And a lot of people in the book talk about that, but it was important to me to get a good variety of different takes on that.
And what do you say to the idea that somebody says, I'm going to forgive you, but I don't want to hang out with you anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't need you. Because there's a couple of cases like that. Yes. And I've experienced that.
Yeah, me too.
Where you forgive somebody in your heart and you really pray for them and you wish them well.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you have some obligation to be palling around with them anymore.
Right. Yeah. And I've also experienced that. And it made me think when I was doing that, have I actually not forgiven that person because I don't want them in my life anymore? Right. And it's a complicated situation. But for me, I really look at it as being able to forgive someone. You can love them from afar, pray for them, want nothing but the best for them. But because you want to have boundaries in your life that are healthy boundaries.
That's the other issue, is the whole boundaries thing. I've been most moved when I have seen people like those Amish girls that were killed, this is just a few years ago, and when that community chose to forgive the killer. I mean, the whole world just, I think, weeps when you hear that. You think, is that even possible? Who are these people?
Yeah.
And then you realize they really must believe in something huge to be able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you see that in a lot of the stories. I think Chris Williams speaks really beautifully on that because he, got into a terrible car accident and lost his whole family, or almost all of his whole family. And he talks about hearing a voice that he believes is God that told him to let it go in that moment of that car. So it's definitely a big presence in a lot of people's lives.
Some of this makes no human sense. The most human natural thing to do is to hate, to want revenge. That's the normal natural thing to do.
Totally, yes.
And so when you hear these other stories, I guess this is my way of saying that it seems to me that this kind of thing is the most powerful apologetic for Christian faith. Because when you see it, you just go, whoa, like I don't even know I don't know how to process that.
Right, yeah. And I think that that's like, I also found myself when interviewing these people, I found myself having that same reaction, which was like, how is it possible? How is that possible to forgive? I mean, the things that have happened to so many people in this book and also just in life in general, and people are able to find compassion and empathy and in their heart to forgive is an incredible thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also comes with a sense of humility, which also comes with a sense of reality, right? In other words, if you think that you're really great, then you don't think that you've done anything wrong, and you don't really have much impetus. Right. And there are people like that who have that kind of attitude. Yeah. And they're always talking about what other people have done to them. But if you have some sense of what you've done to hurt other people, it is a little
right, because none of us are perfect. So we've all been in situations where we've hurt someone or we felt hurt by another person's behavior or actions. So to be aware of that and self-aware is obviously a great thing, but not everybody has that.
Well, yeah, and I think I want to applaud you for writing the book because I think that we need to talk more about this and we need to get this out there. I think that there are tons of people who will read this book whose lives will be changed. And, what an amazing thing that you could write a book and that it will affect people because it goes right to that place of pain that so many people are walking around with. They don't know what to do with it.
Well, it's interesting, and thank you so much for saying that because that's the greatest compliment ever is, my hope is always that if somebody can read this book and feel not alone in their forgiveness journey or feel like they're inspired to practice forgiveness in their own lives, then I feel like my job is done there. But I think that there's just so many different types of forgiveness in this book, and it's also a great learning lesson from different people in this book that you never know what someone's going through walking down the street or standing in line at a coffee shop, and people act and behave certain ways, and even people that I've known for a really long time, when I would say to them, oh, I'm working on this book on forgiveness, the reactions and responses that I would get were really eye-opening for me because I would sit down at dinner and people that I've known for several years, I would tell them that I'm working on this book and some would burst into tears. Others would get really, really quiet and go back to a moment in their past where someone had wronged them that they still were hanging on to 20 or 30 years later. Other people were in the midst of struggling with forgiveness that I had no idea they were going through. And a lot of people, put this presentation on like everything is going so well in their lives, and the reality is that they're actually really struggling. So I think that this book also, of course, the goal is to teach people about forgiveness and inspire them to practice forgiveness in their lives, but also it teaches people to live their lives with a little bit more empathy and kindness for the journey of life that we're all going on together.
Well, as I say, to put this out there, to be public about this, it's like a public service because there are tons of people, they're just looking for something, but they don't know where to go. And you framed it well because it's not overly religious or whatever. This is like a book for everybody. And I think that that's important. We were talking earlier about your husband, Chris Pratt, and how he's been public about his faith. Mm-hmm. And I feel the same way, that when somebody is public about their faith, it gives tons of people strength to say, oh, if he's public about his faith, maybe I can be a little bit more public about my faith. Yes. And it's kind of important.
Yeah, it's just a little. Yeah, no, it's very important. And, I grew up with faith being a really big part of my life. I come from a very big Irish Catholic family. So.
Really?
So it's something that, I've always talked about with my family and my close friends. And I think him talking about it on a public level has definitely helped a huge amount of people who have, religion as a part of their lives and faith as a part of their lives and want to get more comfortable being open and honest about that, because it is such a big gift and a blessing in all of our lives. So to be able to talk about it openly is a great thing.
Yeah, it's huge stuff. So kudos to him.
Thank you.
In your book, you've got all of these stories. A few of them I recognize. The Ron Hall story. What was the name of that book? Same Kind of Different as Me.
Yes.
That's an unbelievable
movie,
story.
Yeah. Yes.
But there are a few in here. What are some of the ones in here that people would be familiar with?
I think Elizabeth Smart is someone, that people remember.
Yeah, that was the first one, right?
Remember that case very well. I think Tanya Brown is Nicole Brown Simpson's sister.
Right.
So people remember that trial and that situation very well.
Yeah.
Sebastian Marroquin is actually not that well known, but his father is Pablo Escobar. So people are
His father is Pablo Escobar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so people are very familiar with that name.
See, most of us, our fathers are not Pablo Escobar.
Right.
It's kind of interesting.
I know.
Wow.
Right.
When you mentioned the story of Elizabeth Smart,
Yes.
I had kind of forgotten the details of that. She was like 14. She's kidnapped. She's raped daily for
Right.
like 9 months.
Yeah.
And then she manages to get over that and to forgive that. And I think, it's important also that you have parents that are helping you with that, because
Yeah.
you can see how some parents would never be able to let go of that.
Of course. I think anybody who has kids, I'm sure, would be hearing this story and think, I couldn't do that, or maybe, some feel like they could. But her parents were actually really helpful for her when she was later returned home. Her parents said to her when she got home, these people have taken so much from you already. Don't allow them to take one more second of your happiness and your future moving forward. And that's where she talks a lot about her being able to practice forgiveness. And I actually talked to her, I think it was a week or 10 days after they had announced that her female captor was being released early.
Right. Oh.
So it was I went into the interview not really knowing what to expect, because also, some people, for a lot of people, forgiveness and the decision to forgive someone can be a one and done situation. And for a lot of us, like myself, it's an ongoing process. So I wasn't really sure where she was in that. And, would her forgiveness decision have been shaky at all with this new decision to have someone
Right.
released? So it was an interesting conversation with her.
When you talk about Nicole Simpson's sister,
Tanya Brown.
you say that her parents, and this makes sense, that at some point, and I'm trying to think of their names, but I mean, we've seen them a million times, the father with the huge handlebar mustache and the glasses and whatever, that they became fixtures, but that they eventually went to church to deal with this. I don't know what kind of church or whatever, but that, that wasn't widely publicized, and they have a Jewish surname. So I would never dream that they would go to a church, but that to find healing, that they did that.
Right. I think it's you reaching a certain point, and there are people, in this book and also just in life in general that I've talked to who do reach a certain point of feeling lost or helpless in certain situations, and, turning towards their faith or finding some faith to help pull them through that and give them a hope there.
Thinking of something like what they went through, it's very hard to fathom how you would process that. And obviously there are people who can't. They break. It ruins their life. It consumes them.
100%.
So it's wonderful to think that people who've been through something that horrible could find a way through. When you're talking about forgiveness, you're talking about ultimate things. You're really talking about evil. What is evil? And what can possess someone? I don't mean that literally, but to do the kinds of things that some of the people do that require forgiveness. I mean, it's unimaginable, thank goodness, to most of us. What would it be like to live an entire life of deception? And it seems to me that on some weird level, you'd have to feel sorry for the person, because they are so deeply messed up that I would imagine they don't even know who they are. They can't begin to know who they are if they've been deceiving themselves and others for years. If you look at somebody not just as a monster, but as a human being, even if they've done something monstrous, you still recognize, well, they're made in the image of God, and that someplace in there, is someone that God loves in spite of the horrors that they've done. And so when you know somebody, it's more difficult in some ways to demonize them and to shut them off in that way. When you wrote this book, I mean, it is a big deal for a young woman to say, I'm going to write a book on forgiveness, because it is such a heavy thing. And what did you think would happen, or what drove you to it? Because it's just such a heavy topic. Was there some inciting incident where you just said, I just feel like I want to do this? Or because I mean, I realize too, as a writer, there's a lot of work involved in interviewing all these people.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of work that goes into it, and I did it over 2.5 years. So it was a really a big labor of love, and I'm thrilled with the way that it's turned out. And I feel really blessed to have been able to talk to these 22 people and them to have given me their time and their stories, and they're all so raw and vulnerable and just really inspiring. So it was a huge gift, but really just struggling myself with forgiveness inspired me to be interested in forgiveness. And then also when I was able to just get such incredible inspiration and stories from other people that helped me so much, it helped me much more than any other outlets that I was kind of going to seek advice from. And so I wanted to create that because I also saw that so many of us are actually struggling with forgiveness and we're not talking about it. So it seems like a really untapped area, and one that I, wanted to kind of put together for other people.